Some of you maybe have seen this happening. John Murray said, perhaps few weaknesses have marred the integrity of the church more than the partiality shown to the rich. The church has compromised with their vices because it has feared the loss of their patronage. Its voice has been silenced by respect of persons, and discipline has been sacrificed in deference to worldly prestige. End quote.
He's talking about money.
And I think that that's kind of like James 2. Have not your faith in terms of respect of persons. If a man comes in and has a gold ring, don't give him the best seat and say to the guy who has lousy clothes, sit under my feet. That's having respect of persons. There's no place for partiality, but only for impartiality. I think when a church is partial to the rich, it isn't any different than selling indulgences. Now, there are other churches that trade on spiritual fear, that attempt to pressure people to give. And this is equally wrong. The right thing to do in the area of giving is to teach the truths of the Word of God and then leave it to the Spirit of God to generate the response along with all the rest of the fruits of spirituality. And so we teach the Word of God. We don't use gimmicks.
Listen to this for a minute on money, guys.
We just teach the Word of God, assuming the Spirit of God will produce in the lives the kind of giving commensurate with the kind of life. Now, we said that the giving patterns of the Scripture in terms of Revelation fall into three categories. In the first part, we studied category 1, which was giving from the book of Genesis to the time of Moses, the first phase of giving in terms of God's history. The second phase was from Moses to Christ, the time of the law. We covered then the fact that the Old Testament teaches two things: required giving, that is, pay your taxes; free will giving, that is, give to God whatever your heart desires to giving. No frequency was prescribed, and very little was said other than to say generosity and liberality will be rewarded. Now, this morning we come to the New Testament. And we're going to study what the New Testament has to say about giving. And let me just begin by saying this. It says exactly the same thing the Old Testament did. There have been a lot of people who said, well, Old Testament giving was one thing and New Testament giving is something else. That isn't so. New Testament giving is more clearly defined, but it is the same. There are two kinds of giving stressed in the New Testament. One, pay your taxes. Two, give God whatever you want. There is no amount. Let's begin by looking at the required giving of the New Testament. What was required in the New Testament? To begin with, let's look at Matthew chapter 17. We are introduced to the subject in the New Testament of required giving. Now remember, the tithes that were exacted from the Jews, along with the temple tax, along with the land Sabbath rest, along with the special profit-sharing tax where a man couldn't harvest the corners of his field, he had to leave them to the poor. All of this was taxation. And in the New Testament times, in the times that the Gospels were written primarily, the Jews were still under these laws. And so it was proper for a Jew to continue to pay his tithes to Israel, to support the priests, to have money for the poor, to take care of the feast in Jerusalem. These things continually went on. The taxation system in the time of Christ was still going. The temple treasury, the court of the women, still had those 13 little trumpet-shaped receptacles, and the people still came there and they still put their tax money in those things. In addition to that, however, the Romans were exacting taxes from them, and that was becoming an absorbent thing. But they were still under the obligation of Mosaic law to pay their taxes. And Jesus remarks regarding this repeatedly in the Gospels. Let's look at Matthew 17:24. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received the tax money, tribute means taxes, came to Peter and said, does not your master pay taxes? Now, these are the tax collectors. And they came to Peter and they said, what about your master? Does he pay taxes? I like this. He said, what? Yes, Jesus paid his taxes. We ought to pay our taxes. He did. And I think it's so exciting to see Matthew present this, because Matthew, you see, is involved in declaring Christ as king. And even though he is king, in fact, King of Kings, he still subscribes himself to that which was right in terms of paying the required legal taxes. Jesus paid his taxes. Now I want you to see how he paid them. This was kind of interesting. And when he was coming to the house, Jesus spoke first to him, saying, what are you thinking, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own sons or strangers? Well, obviously, kings don't tax their own sons. They work around that. Strangers. Peter said unto him, of strangers. Jesus said unto him, then are the sons free. In other words, he's making a little analogy, really, that we don't need to pay their taxes. We're truly the family of the king. But, in spite of that, lest we should offend them, go out of the sea, cast a hook, take up the fish that first comes up, and when you have opened its mouth, you shall find a piece of money. Take that and give to them for me and you. Now, friends, that's the way to get your tax money.
Notice the attitude. Met the
If
objection.
that was still in vogue about April 1st, the beaches would be lined with Christians from San Diego to San Francisco, you know.
That a stumbling block wouldn't be
We have
thrown
to
in their
admit
way.
that God is not still operating on
So
that
they wouldn't
basis.
offend them.
The point of the passage is simply this. Jesus paid his taxes. Jesus, again, advocating what the Father advocated in the Old Testament Mosaic time, what the Father instituted in the pre-Mosaic time, pay your taxes.
And I would just say, Paul said he would not give any offense to the gospel, not to the Jew, nor the Gentile, nor Caesar. Notice the pattern there. Now, in the hoods, the rejection is the reason why many African-American males, I can say, reject the gospel is because the way we deal with our money. To them, it seems like respectable persons because they don't see their relatives getting any help from the church. We see, they know God is helping them, but they don't see us having each other's backs. That's the culture. We all eat. All right.
What do you think about this? Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Should we pay our taxes or not? To Rome. Well, you see, if Jesus says pay your taxes, then the Jews are down on it. He's pro-Roman. If he says don't pay your taxes, the Romans are down on it. So they think they've got him between a rock and a hard place. But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? He used the direct approach. Verse 19. Show me the tax money. Give me a coin. They brought him a denarius. And he said unto them, whose is this image and superscription? Whose picture's on this coin? And they said, Caesar's. He said unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And really that was a tremendous answer, much more insightful than it sounds. This stuff can go to Caesar. The important stuff will be God. When they heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. Taxation is necessary, and Jesus said, pay your taxes. Pay your taxes. Do what's right. That's required giving. Again, you have in Luke 18:12 another reference to tithing, and this is the only other mention of it in the Gospels at all. There is no exacting of the tithe on the church anywhere in the New Testament. It is never required of the church. It is always in reference to Israel's economy in the Gospels, and in the book of Hebrews, it is only mentioned in reference to Melchizedek and Abraham way back in the book of Genesis. It has no bearing on the church at all. And here it's in connection with boasting and hypocrisy. 18:12, this Pharisee came to the temple, prayed to himself, and said, I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess. And here he's boasting about his tithing. He paid his taxes. Well, listen, friends, paying your taxes wasn't anything to boast about. You're supposed to do that. So the gospel, that's all the gospel says about tithing. The 4 books that we know as the Gospels. That's all it has to say. And all of those incidents in reference to Israel's paying its taxations to the national government or to Rome, giving them what is due them. And as I said, in the book of Hebrews chapter 7, the only other mention of tithing has to do with what Abraham did in Melchizedek's case. And that was Abraham gave a tenth, not because God told him to, it just so happened that he gave a tenth. He volunteered to give that amount. At no time does the New Testament ever suggest or even hint, and there are plenty of places where it might have, but it does not, that the tithe is exacted upon the Christian. And incidentally, I told you that the tithe in the Old Testament was 23%, not the 10% we think, because it was 3 tithes. All right, in Romans 13, let's find out what the New Testament has to say in the epistles to the church about this required giving. Now, we're not under the Jewish economy. You say, wow, I'm not a Jew. I'm not living in Israel. I don't have to pay my taxes anymore. That's the national government of Israel. That was for the funding of that nation. I'm in America. We don't have a religious theocracy here. That's for sure. That still doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you're not on the hook for taxation. Verse 1 of Romans 13 says, there's no power but of God. The powers that be ordained of God. If you resist that power, verse 2, you're going to receive judgment. Now go down to verse 6. For this cause pay your taxes. For they, that is, the ministers of the United States government, or whatever government you're in, are God's ministers. You say,
Against evil,
no.
when evil flourishes.
Oh, yes.
Okay?
You say,
Or
but
evil.
they're not very godly. You're right. In many cases, that is true. Nevertheless, God has designed human government as a force to keep society together, to punish the evil and to support the good. And in that sense, not in the sense that I'm a minister of God, but in the sense that they rule in the place of God through an institution of God called human government, they are His ministers. Remember this. When you pay your taxes, you are in the truest sense supporting the work of God. Now, I know that comes as a shock, but it is true. You say, well, if I cheat a little on my taxes here and cheat a little on my taxes there, I'll
we
get
call
more money for the Lord.
police.
No. You will rob the Lord. You will fall into the category of Malachi 3
Or
by
tragedy.
not paying your taxes. The government is to be funded by the people. Listen, especially Christian people. Now, we know the God who has set the government up.
Also for the poor.
Don't cheat the
'Cause that's
government.
what
You just cheat yourself
Israel
out of blessing. You take to yourself what belongs to God.
was
Actually, we got
set
to
up.
figure out every way you can pay your taxes.
Deuteronomy 14,
It's a terrific
15,
opportunity.
Deuteronomy 26, Malachi 3, 10, 11.
I think I got a little mixed emotion on that.
Always has supported the poor.
Render therefore to all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due. Custom to whom custom. Fear to whom fear. Honor to whom honor. Right across the board. Honor the government. And God will bless you because you've been obedient to His principle and you've supported His ministry. All right, now that takes care of required giving. And all it says about required giving in the New Testament is, friends, pay your taxes. That's God's design. And to be blessed. Now let's go to free will giving. And here we enter the category of the giving that is truly giving to God. There is no reference about tithing in any passage at all in the New Testament that talks about Christian giving. Absolutely none.
So don't make
Jesus
it dogma.
never made the tithe incumbent.
You can do it,
Paul
but don't
never
make
made
it
incumbent.
required.
Peter, John, James, nobody. The writer of Hebrews, none of the writers of the New Testament. Jude made it incumbent.
Don't
Luke
take
and
advantage.
None.
Just put it out there.
Let's look at the 10
It's
principles
okay.
then that the New Testament does give
But don't make it the left.
for Christian giving. 10 of them listed. Now we'll go through them rather quickly, and I think you'll find it most helpful. Point number 1. Giving is investing with God. Giving is investing with God. Luke 6:38. Now this is a terrific verse. Luke 6:38. Give, and it shall be given unto you. You see the principle there? You don't have to be a banker to figure out, but that is the principle of investment. You give to God, and it shall be given to you. How? Good measure. It'll be measured out good. Pressed down. You know what that means? It means that it won't be, like the crackers that you buy at the market that you get home and you open the box and there's a little pile at the bottom, right? But that when God gives back to you, it'll be pressed down, jam-packed in the vernacular, shaken together. If they'd shake those crackers before they sell those packages, you'd really know what you're getting. It'll be shaken together, packed down, and still what? Running over shall men give into your bosom. You see, God will move upon others to support your needs far beyond what you gave. For with the same measure you measure, it shall be measured to you again. What you invest with God, you receive dividends on. What you don't invest with God, you don't get any dividend on. Now there's the biblical principle in the New Testament that's at the basis or the heart of the whole of Christian giving. Giving is investing with God, and the return is an eternal yield, an eternal dividend. Now I want you to look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. Don't invest your fortune in the earth. Some of you have done that, and now you wish you hadn't. Don't do it. Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. In other words, be sure that your priority is investing with God, because wherever you put your treasure, that's where you're going to put your heart. Let's say that I take $20,000. And I said, all right, I have two choices. I can put my $20,000 in an earthly investment. And so I take this $20,000 of precious commodity and I put it into an earthly investment. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start thinking about that $20,000. Every time I get the paper, I'm going to find out where the stocks are and what the thing is and find out about my money. And pretty soon, that $20,000 is going to start running my mind. And I'm going to start plugging into what's happening economically, and I'm going to start biting my economic fingernails, and I'm going to start worrying about my $20,000. And all that does is generate my attitudes and actions and responses toward the world, because that's where I put it. Let's say I take the same $20,000 and I give it to God. Then where does that generate my attention? I'm going to say, Lord, remember that $20,000 I gave you? Boy, I hope you're seeing some return on that. And it generates my relationship to Him. You see? That's what it means when it says where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. For wherever your investment is, you're going to be preoccupied with wanting to see the dividends on your investment. So you lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven. Now the point is in verse 24, at the very end of this little session. He says, no man can serve two masters, that is, two lords, two people who have absolute authority over him. For either he'll hate one and love the other, else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You can't be a slave to God and money. It's one or the other. If we would learn to invest with God, it would generate activity going that way, because we'd be checking in on our investment all the time. Believe me, I would much rather give my money to God than to any organization I know that runs on an economic base. Wouldn't you? You think God's more trustworthy? I know that God is a secure investment, so investing with God is a basic premise.
So, we see what they just said is riding with the G-O-D. And what did Jesus say? He said, to those have done it to the least of my brethren, they have done it to me. Okay? The Good Samaritan, the guy took his money, picked the guy off the ground, as the Lord tells the story, and then he pays for the hospital bill once. No, he says, now if there's anything else he needs that you find that he might need, I'll come again and pay it again. So we see Jesus in his teachings. Did he ever point it to the Pharisees or the religious leaders? He said, yeah, render everything that they say, but he necessarily did not point out, give it to the priests. And that was what they did in the Old Testament, tithes for the priests. At that time, they probably were already doing that, but why didn't he emphasize that? Why did he emphasize the least of these, my brother? Why did he emphasize that saying you've done it directly to me when I was in prison, when I was hungry, when I was naked? Listen, man, it's very clear. And then Paul emphasized 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, the whole 2 chapters dedicated to argue the principle of equality of care and using resources to meet the needs of the saints. He didn't tell the Jerusalem church, my God shall supply all your need. They took up the money, Paul, Titus, who came later, and the brethren, and they took that money to relieve those saints. In our day, it probably would look like this. About to be homeless, the economy, whatever, they're being persecuted, jobless, housing is a threat, food is a threat, basic necessities. Now that's happening all around our world that we live in today. The question is, do we believe that we can do something about it? Or do we just believe we give to God and He's going to do something about it? Joshua 1, they had to share with each other, dealing with material things as far as possessing the promised land. Because those that already had their money, let's say, on the side of Jordan, they had their land and had their stuff. Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh were charged to help their brother till they got their land, and then they can go back and enjoy their land. Read Joshua 1. And then there were many economic systems. Deuteronomy 14, that was the tithing system for the poor every 3rd year. Every 7th year, there was the year of release and helping your brother with debt. Do we do that? No, well, I'm not saying we got to keep the letter of the law, but I'm saying sharing, caring, and communicating and being ready to distribute has to be more than just a bucket and call it God. Many preachers have exploited that and became wealthy because now we're focusing on one member and their duty. The members of the church have assignments as well that's equally important as they deal with people out there. There's been great preachers reached by people that are unknown to reach that one member. If it would have taken resources to help them, what a witness they could have entered an open door through helping in necessities. Then the person gets saved, they tell the testimony of how they let somebody on a college campus or whatever, and the bottom line is they gave their life to the Lord. Now they got this worldwide ministry. So are you saying give to God, to him, so he can reach more people? That might be part of it, but what happened to the person that helped them in the beginning? Did they give to God? Of course they did. That's what Jesus said, if you did it to the least of these, while the person had no reputation, had nowhere to turn, here was the child of God. And think about our families. We've been charged that, Isaiah 58, do not hide from your own flesh. That means your relatives and your friends. But to help them, you see, Isaiah 58 is saying, even to the point in that case, bring them into your house if they're homeless. So that's a heavy thing to put on somebody. Nevertheless, what's the general principle, universal law? You may not bring them into your home, you might. Giving and sharing. And with who? God. Now, who is God? That's the question. Where is God? God don't need any money, does he? So who needs it? The preacher to preach and the poor in their necessities. So why do we do one and leave the other undone? I'll give y'all the last word. Jeremiah 23 includes.